Sometimes life doesn't fall apart with a shout or a loud argument. Sometimes all it takes to turn your world upside down are a few words typed in cold, emotionless letters on a glowing screen. Adeline would never forget that moment. She was at the pharmacy, standing in line, holding a prescription for an expensive medicine, $140. She was already doing the mental math of what she'd have to postpone that week to pay for it. Maybe push the electric bill, maybe delay the kitchen faucet repair a few more days. Her heart was racing, as always, because every financial decision felt like a rope pulled too tight. It was in that ordinary setting, the beeping of cash registers, the smell of disinfectant, the murmur of impatient people behind her, that her phone buzzed. A short, simple ping, but the message on the screen would change everything. Don't come to the wedding. You and your kids just make things awkward. It was from her mother. There was no explanation, no preamble, just that dry, hard, definitive sentence. Adeline stopped breathing for a few seconds. The phone felt heavy in her hand, as if it had turned to stone. Before she could react, the family group chat lit up with a notification. Her sister had replied with a laughing emoji, then another laugh, and another. It felt coordinated. An inside joke, as if it were funny. There, standing among strangers, Adeline felt the ground drop out from under her feet. A familiar wave of rejection ran through her body, but this time there was something different, a cold clarity, as if the veil had finally fallen. She typed just one sentence, her hands shaking. "Then you won't need my card for the venue." And she hit send. The group kept laughing, as if nothing had happened, as if it were just another family joke. What they didn't know, what it didn't even cross anyone's mind in that chat to consider, was that Adeline was holding the one thing they couldn't afford to lose. The single piece propping up that entire house of cards, and in that instant, in the middle of the pharmacy, with a prescription in one hand and her phone in the other, everything began to unravel. Adeline Moore was 35 years old. She was the mother of 2 children, 2 little forces of nature who gave meaning to her days, but who also demanded more energy than any spreadsheet could ever account for. She worked as an accountant at a large pharmaceutical company. Her days were a quiet marathon, the rush to drop the kids at school, endless hours in front of spreadsheets, invoices, numbers that never stopped multiplying. The return home, already at night, when the exhaustion felt stuck to her bones, and even so, she always made room for family, room for her mother's requests, room for her sister's demands. It was almost automatic. Adeline had grown up hearing that family comes first, that blood is blood, that there's nothing nobler than helping your own. But what she learned, without realizing it, was that, in that house, helping always came at a price. Her mother, Angela, had an almost artistic skill. She could turn guilt into currency. All it took was a short phrase and Adeline would open her wallet, give up her rest, give up the little she'd saved for herself. "Only you can fix this. You're the most responsible one. Your sisters are still young." These phrases repeated like a mantra, and with each repetition, another bill landed on Adeline's shoulders. By 16, she was already covering small expenses that weren't hers. At 20, she was signing contracts she couldn't really afford. By 25, she was seen as the family's safe harbor, even if that meant sinking deeper into responsibilities that weren't hers to carry. When her sisters, Jenna and Megan, went to college, who signed as guarantor on their student loans? Adeline. When her stepfather, Ulrich, lost his job for a few months, who paid the water and electric bills, and even her mother's hair appointments? Adeline. When any crisis came up, big or small, who got called? Adeline. It was as if she were the family's invisible bank, a bank that didn't charge interest and never got paid back, and for years she believed that was normal, that this was the role of a daughter who wanted to be good. On top of that, there was her parallel life. Adeline wasn't just a daughter, she was a single mother of 2 young children. She carried alone the concerns about school, health, food on the table. Her days were constant juggling, work spreadsheets during the day, grocery runs in the late afternoon, homework help at night, and the quiet loneliness when the kids finally fell asleep. At those times, she would stare at the ceiling and wonder, "Does anyone notice how tired I am?" But there was no room for that question. Because the next morning, her mother would call asking for help, or her sister would text that her card payment had bounced, or some new expense would pop up. And Adeline, even exhausted, would say yes. When Jenna, the youngest sister, announced her engagement, the whole house exploded in celebration. Her mother cried with joy, Megan started planning to be a bridesmaid, and Adeline reached for the calculator. The wedding would be big. The kind you see in magazines, a lakeside venue with glass walls reflecting the sunset, imported flowers, an upscale buffet. Who signed the venue contract? Adeline. Who paid the deposits? Adeline. Who handled vendors, coordinators, and tastings because Jenna said she was too stressed? Adeline. $3,000 for the deposit, $1,200 for catering consultations, $600 for floral samples, all on her card. And still, she kept hearing the same phrase, said jokingly, "You're so good with money, you can handle it." Adeline told herself it was fine, that it was temporary, that they'd pay her back later, but deep down, she knew they never would. It was in this context that the message arrived. After months of effort, after more than $4,000 out of her pocket, after every weekend spent visiting vendors, came the invitation to disappear. "Don't come to the wedding. You and your kids just make things awkward." And with the string of laughs that followed, it became clear it wasn't a joke, it was the truth. They didn't want her there, they only wanted her card. Adeline stood frozen in the pharmacy line. Around her, the world kept turning, the register beeping, a child asking their mother for candy, the clink of coins on the counter, but inside, everything had stopped. The words on the screen burned like branding iron. "Don't come to the wedding. You and your kids just make things awkward." It was as if someone had pressed a cold knife against her chest. And when her sister replied with the laughing emoji, that knife twisted. Adeline wasn't naive. She knew something had been wrong in the family's dynamic for a long time. She knew her mother, Angela, had a rare talent for manipulating with short phrases. She knew her sisters had laughed at her expense more than once. But feeling something is one thing. Seeing it spelled out is another. It was different. It was raw. It was final. Her finger hovered over the keyboard for a few seconds. Her heart pounded. She could have written a long rant, sent voice notes, begged for an explanation, but she didn't. Her reply came short, sharp, almost surgical. "Then you won't need my card for the venue." She hit send and breathed. New laughs popped up on the screen, a cascade of emojis, as if it were funny. But for Adeline, there was nothing funny anymore. In that instant, something inside her clicked. It was as if she had woken up from a trance. For years, she had lived in a cycle of giving and giving, believing that one day she'd be recognized, that one day she'd be loved not for her money but for who she was. Now she saw the naked truth. There was no chair for her at that table. She wasn't a guest. She was the invisible foundation holding everything up. That message wasn't just an invitation not to come. It was a sentence. It was as if they were saying, "You only have value as long as you pay. Otherwise, you're a nuisance." And that clarity, instead of knocking her down, brought a strange calm. The kind of calm that comes when you finally accept a truth you've avoided for years. That night, lying in bed, Adeline didn't cry as she expected. She didn't toss and turn. She didn't scream into the pillow. She just lay still, staring at the ceiling. The room was dark, except for the bluish glow of her phone at her side. The family group chat still lit up with notifications, memes, snide jokes, nasty comments. She didn't open it. She muted it. And that simple gesture, sliding her finger to silence the notifications, sounded like a shout. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to turn their noise off. The next morning, while making the kids' breakfast, a thought flashed like lightning. The contract, the wedding venue, the glass hall by the lake. That contract had her name on it. Adeline left the toaster on and ran to the bedroom. She opened the desk drawer. There it was, a thick envelope with the venue's logo stamped on it. She opened it, flipped through, and there, in firm black letters, primary contact, Adeline Moore. Her heart pounded harder. She remembered the sweet voice of the venue coordinator, Melissa, saying, "Anything you need, just let me know. You're the responsible party. You can make changes or cancel if necessary." At the time, Adeline thought it was just a formality. Now, it felt like a golden key in her hands. Her hands trembled as she opened her laptop. The cursor blinked on a blank screen. She took a deep breath. She typed slowly, "Hi, Melissa, I have a question. If needed, can I cancel the reservation? Best, Adeline Moore." She read it twice, 3 times, and clicked send. Her heart thudded like a drum. Part of her almost regretted it, but it was too late. The next morning, the reply arrived. "Hi, Adeline. Yes, of course. Since the contract is in your name, only you can request a cancellation. We're here if you need anything. Sincerely, Melissa." Adeline read those lines over and over, and for the first time in a long time, she felt in control. But she didn't cancel. Not yet. She waited 2 days. Meanwhile, the family chat kept churning out laughs, jokes, memes at her expense. They thought they had won, that they had excluded her. But Adeline knew something they didn't. The table they were sitting at existed only because she was holding up the legs, and now, if she wanted to, she could simply let go. In those days, something changed inside her. It was as if she'd walked out of a stuffy room and taken a breath of fresh air for the first time. She moved through the house in silence, making dinner for the kids, washing dishes, organizing work spreadsheets. But inside her, there was new space, a space of clarity. She could see now that her whole life had been about trying to prove her worth, begging for love with receipts, believing that if she gave enough, she would eventually be accepted. But that text from her mother had cut the last thread. There was no illusion left, only the truth was liberating. On Wednesday morning, Adeline woke up early. The sun had barely risen, but the house was already full of familiar sounds. The kids getting ready for school, the smell of toast, the murmur of cartoons on the TV. Inside her, there was something else, a firm quiet. That strange calm that comes before a storm. As she spread butter on her youngest toast, she thought, today. As soon as she dropped the kids at school, she parked the car and picked up her phone. She dialed the venue coordinator. The call was answered on the second ring. "Good morning, Adeline," Melissa's cheerful voice chimed. "I imagine you're calling to confirm the final payment, right?" Adeline took a deep breath. For a second, she hesitated. Then the clarity returned. Actually, Melissa, I need to cancel the event. Silence on the other end. Not an awkward silence, but an understanding one, almost as if Melissa had expected it. Understood, Adeline, she replied at last. Since the contract is in your name, you have full authority. I'll process the cancellation right now. And with one click, months of planning evaporated. Adeline hung up. She looked at the steering wheel, at her steady hands. She'd expected to feel guilty, maybe even panic, but she didn't. What she felt was lightness, the kind of lightness that comes only when you finally let go of a weight you were never meant to carry.